Dr. Sterling at the University of Michigan, with Dr. Kramer at the University of Hawaii in the Political Science Department, and Dr. Green in the Hawaiian History Department of the University of Hawaii. And I'm Dr. Wright of the BYU University of Hawaii. We're sitting here at the Territorial Office Building of Hawaii, and at this time in the 1930s, this was where the police department was at this time. And so if Dr. Sterling, maybe you can enlighten us about the police department during this time of how things are being influenced, within the department itself.
Yeah. During the 1920s and early 30s, there was a major shift in the police force in Hawaii. Prior, it had been mostly Hawaiians in the law enforcement, but at this time it changed to mostly predominantly white officers. And this is because of the territorial government at the time wanting more white officers to represent themselves. Racism and bias towards the non-white folks the police officers are dealing with at the time.
Dr. Kramer, I was kind of impressed with your research on kind of the judicial system and how things are being influenced by race. Maybe you can enlighten us about that time and how it affected the police department also.
Oh, most certainly. It's very common in the judiciary system in Hawaii at that time for the people in power to be affluent and white. There hardly was any emphasis given on their actual credentials or experience in that area. The emphasis was whether you were white and if you're rich. And that influenced the police department because every single one of the most influential men in the territory at that time were rich and white. And rich white men had a tendency to hire other rich white men to run things. So there's a lot of corruption going on at that time.
Dr. Sterling, it was interesting you talked about the police department, but who was the head of the department at that time? And how was he kind of appointed?
Yeah, at the time of the Massie Trail, Chief Detective John McIntosh was the head of detectives. He was appointed politically, and most other police officers would have described him as a drunk, inefficient at policing, incompetent. And during the detective work, you can see, after looking at the evidence, that he constantly tried to frame the 5 defendants because of his biases. And this really played out in the courtroom where we ended up with a hung jury.
Dr. Green, I was really impressed. Give us a couple examples of some officers who kind of showed the other side of the police department.
Yeah, Officer Lau is one example of an officer who was not corrupt. He was not white, and he went to the scene of the case, or the crime scene, with Officer McIntosh, and McIntosh had abandoned tire tracks there, and Officer Lau saw these tire tracks and suspected that there was corruption going on with the police force, and he refused to take photos of these tracks. So that's just one example of one officer who's not corrupt.
Thank you, doctor, for taking time to come and talk to us today about the Massie affair. And I guess we can conclude that the police department was heavily influenced by race, and that the 5 defendants would have had no opportunity to lead otherwise, and that the result of the trial is what is kind of it. Thank you all. The way the case was conducted was very unorganized. For example, when Ben Ahukuela was brought to the Queens Medical Hospital Center to be identified by Thalia Massie, it was just clearly a bunch of accusations with no evidence. Ben clearly said that he did not ever even see Thalia Massie before, but Thalia and McIntosh quickly, said otherwise. Depend on the color of your skin, and Ben was a brown man, and being brown means you were guilty. Bottom line.